Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book-to-show comparison for the Expanse Season 3, Episode 9, Intransigence. This video is a part of a series of videos where I compare the Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for the Expanse up to the end of Season 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, if you have seen Season 3 but have yet to read the novels, not to worry, this video will not contain any spoilers from the novels that have yet to occur after Season 3. So our episode begins on the Behemoth, where they are dealing with the power outages after they fired their missile at the Rosinante. Drummer laughs and Ashford asks what the fuck she's laughing at, and she replies at how their ship fell apart just because they fired a weapon. Ashford replies by saying, well, what we got is what we get. More ready to work with what they have rather than complaining about it. But then he notices Naomi asking to check and see if the Rosinante survives, so he goes over there to ask what she's doing, but she ignores him and says that she doesn't work for him. But Drummer chimes in saying that she was the one that ordered the destruction of the Rosinante, and she can hate her later, but now she needs to get to work repairing the ship. She's upset but leaves to do so. So in the novels, we don't get a scene like this, as Naomi being on the Behemoth changes the dynamic quite a bit. We don't see the Behemoth after it fires. No one is freaking out on whether or not the Rosinante was destroyed, which is funny because Sam was friends with the Rosinante crew, but we never got her input on the whole thing. So it did add to have this internal struggle of the two friends, Naomi and Drummer, being at odds because she may have killed her other friends, including her lover. And I think that adds to the story, so I'll give this a +2. So then we go over to the Rosinante, where we see Alex, Amos, and Holden in the command center trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Alex explains that the missile is no longer headed towards them and is drifting towards the middle, just like the Belter ship. They then deduce there is a sort of speed limit inside the ring, where if anything goes too fast, something grabs it and it floats towards the center. They examine their surroundings as there are no visible stars, and they find they are surrounded by a strange field, and in the middle of this area there's a structure Holden describes as a nucleus. Holden then says the most important thing is getting communications up, but Alex says somehow they've been sabotaged and something is preventing them from getting access to key systems. And this is around the time Amos notices that Monica and Cohen are filming this meeting, and he looks up in sudden realization and smashes the camera and grabs a hold of Cohen. As the ship was sabotaged, so he assumes it must have been one of them who did it. Monica proclaims her innocence, but Cohen then admits to planting something in the ship's systems, but it was supposed to just give him access to the ship's nav and other key information. He had no idea it would do this. Just then, Alex alerts them that something is coming into the ring, and it appears to be a probe. The probe then backs out of the ring, and then the MCRN ship, the Susan, enters the ring and target locks the Rosinante. But Holden isn't concerned, as their torpedoes wouldn't work any better than the last one. But Holden stresses that they need to get the comms back online, so Amos grabs Cohen and tells him that he needs to know how to unfuck the ship. Meanwhile, Holden says he's going to get some inside information, so he goes to his room to be alone, but Miller doesn't appear to him. So when we first see the Rosinante after it entered the ring, it's in the form of Holden giving a presentation to Monica and her team that are filming it, where he explains all about the new space they're in and the new rules here. Holden refers to it as the slow zone, which was the name Monica Stewart liked because all ships have to go slow not to be grabbed by the energy field. In the novels, this area will continue to be referred to as the slow zone even after the speed limit is lifted. The name just sticks. However, to my recollection, they never used this term or any other to describe this space within the ring in the show. Anyway, Naomi interrupts, saying she doesn't like the name the slow zone and prefers Alex's name for the space, Dandelion Sky, which is in fact the title of the next episode, episode 10. But Also, it wasn't used in the show. So, Naomi thought that it more accurately described what the space looked like, but Monica hated it as it's too imprecise and only people from Earth and Mars would get it. So Holden continues his presentation to describe the structure in the middle of the slow zone, but here they refer to it as a station, or the station. Even though they don't know if it is a station, as they have no idea what it is, they just reason since it's the only structure in here, then it must act as some sort of control station. Anyway, in the novels, the Martians had already sent probes in, so they already knew about the speed limit and exactly what it was, so they didn't need to speculate like they do in the show. And the Martians didn't send in ships after Holden immediately. It was in fact the Behemoth that was the first ship to follow Holden in, and the UNN and the Martian ships followed them. Also, they discovered Cohen was the saboteur much later. Amos didn't just assume it was them, as the ship could have been sabotaged at port for all they know. However, when Naomi kept trying to reboot the system to purge the virus, every time she tried, something somehow managed to reattach the virus back to the key systems every time after she rebooted. After working on the problem and coming up with nothing for a very long time, she sent Amos to fix the lights in the bathroom, mainly just to get him out of her hair, and he just so happens to find a piece of equipment attached to the lighting in the bathroom, and then they suspected that it was the 4 members of Monica Teams, because this piece of equipment was responsible for every time Naomi rebooted the systems, it would reinsert the virus into the Rosnate every time, preventing Naomi from purging the systems. And it took Cohen a lot longer to confess. It wasn't until Amos threatened to throw them all out of the airlock one by one, then Cohen finally confessed. However, here he was paid money to implant it there before he even knew he was coming on board the Rosnate in the first place, that somehow his rich benefactor set the whole thing up for Mars to sue Holden and for Monica Stewart's team to come on board, but he had no idea what this piece of equipment would do, because he would have died along with them. Also in the novels, Holden never tried to get information out of Miller about the slow zone or the station, but really it doesn't sound like a bad idea. So this is a hard one, as the books give more information, but the show's version is more exciting, so I think by a hair I'm going to go with the show, because having Holden spout out exposition for a documentary is nowhere near as exciting as this very intense scene here, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go to the Thomas Prince, where it's being announced by Avasarala through a communique from Earth that all civilians are being evacuated to Titan, as the Thomas Prince intends to go through the ring. We then see Melba sitting with her team, Stani, who we met before, and Soledad, who we are just seeing for the first time. Soledad mentions that they are offering triple hazard pay to anyone who volunteers to stay on the Thomas Prince to go in the ring, but Stani says that just means whoever stays is guaranteed to die. Soledad agrees and says that she's taking her ass to Titan. She then asks where Ren is, and Stani says he probably was on the Sun Un when it exploded. He said he was probably sleeping one off, so he died the way he lived. Melba is bothered by this, so she tells Stani to show some respect. Soledad then mentions that they should probably sort out his locker for his family, and so they go to do so. So in the novels, the civilian population was never ordered to evacuate the Thomas Prince, but I'll touch on that in a moment. As far as Melba sitting with her team in the mess, this seems to be a combination of 2 scenes from the novels. The first is of the surviving members of Melba's team sitting in the mess hall discussing how Ren's missing. This scene, however, took place before the destruction of the Sun Un, so as I mentioned in previous videos in the novels, it was never believed Ren died when the Sun Un exploded. And this scene was more of a solidarity in the team, as they were all mourning Ren's death, even Stani, who did get a bit choked up in this scene. And the other scene comes later when it is announced that the Thomas Prince is going into the ring. Melba has been locked in her room, brooding about how James Holden got away from her, and her whole plan could fall apart if others get to him first and find evidence that he was framed. She didn't notice that she got an urgent alert about the Thomas Prince entering the ring until Soledad came to her crying, saying that she won't go. Since Melba didn't see the alert, she didn't know what she was talking about until she checked her messages. So Soledad begged her to send Stoney or Bob instead, but of course this was the very solution to Melba's problems, that she could possibly get to Holden first. So she told Soledad that the job was Melba's and no one else's. So it is implied here that unlike the show, it wasn't volunteered based, and that as team leader, Melba had to order one person on her team to stay behind. Also, I should talk about Soledad, since it's the first time we're seeing her in the show, whereas in the novel she appeared much earlier and had many conversations with Melba. One such conversation, they kind of bonded over the fact that Soledad's father had died on Eros when the protomolecule took over, so Melba mentioned that her sister was there too. So when Soledad went to Melba over the ring, the reason she gave as to why she couldn't go is because of the fate her father suffered. It made her fear the protomolecule more. The triple hazard pay thing was a nice touch. I don't remember that being in the novels, and this scene was a nice way to condense a lot of info from the novels. But it does come off as just that, condensed, where the novels took more time to set this up properly, therefore it was more interesting, so I'm going to give this a -2. So then we see Pastor Anna and Hector Cortez, or Father Hank, sitting in the mess hall talking about how disappointing it is that they're being evacuated, as to come so close just to be turned away is a huge disappointment. Tilly Fagan then approaches the table and Cortez asks if she's coming to share in their disappointment, but she says, "Me? Oh no." Cortez then remarks that at least the company will be good on Titan, to which Tilly remarks that she's sure they will have a lovely time. Anna then asks her if that means she doesn't plan to join them, but Tilly vaguely laughs it off and says, well, that would be telling. So in the novels, as I said, the civilians were never evacuated. In fact, going into the ring was Father Hank's idea in the first place, as he was putting together a petition to enter the ring. The petition further stated that the UN and the Martians should go in together, as at this stage only the Behemoth had announced that it would go into the ring. Cortez went to Anna asking her to sign the petition. Anna thought this was a great idea because out there on the other side of the ring, the Martians, the UN, and the OPA ships were becoming hostile towards one another, but in the ring, they'd be one joint task force exploring the ring together, and that solidarity appealed to Anna, as did the prospect of exploring the unknown, so she fully backed Cortez. Also, it should be noted that at this stage, Anna had already started services on board the Thomas Prince and had already gathered a small flock of supporters. And so by adding Anna to the petition, her name carried much more weight to Cortez's proposal. Plus, Cortez sounded a bit jealous that he didn't think to do services himself. Tilly, for her part, was simply mocking Cortez the whole time that he asked for Anna's support, and by this stage she was referring to Anna as Annie, something Anna didn't like, but Tilly didn't seem to notice or care. Tilly overall seemed indifferent to going into the ring, probably because it was Cortez's idea, which is in contrast to her show counterpart who really wants to stay. This scene was fine, but again, I think the book's version is more fleshed out and therefore better, so I'm going to give this a -1. So in the mess hall, Melba hears Tilly's laughter, and this sparks a memory as we transition to a flashback where we see Melba at a house party that Tilly is also at, laughing. So apparently they knew each other. Tilly remarks about how she probably won't show up to her own party, and Melba tells another guest that she'll go check on her. So we see her come into a room where Jules Pierre Mal is arguing with Julie Mal, and dun dun dun, we get the reveal that Melba is actually Clarissa Mal, Jules Pierre's other daughter and Julie's sister. Clarissa tries to tell them to stop arguing, but they ignore her. Jules Pierre is complaining that Julie is going to announce she's quitting the racing team so she can go whoring out in the belt, something Julie takes offense to, asking if that's how he really sees her. He then calls her a bunch of names like petty, spoiled, arrogant, but she interrupts him by saying fuck you and tells him that everything he does is corrupt and she wants no part of it, and then she storms out. Jules Pierre then tells Clarissa to send all the guests home and that he'll have to cancel the rest of the racing team's season. Clarissa suggests that she could take over for Julie, but Jules Pierre just dismisses the idea out of hand, saying, "Don't be absurd." So these flashbacks are great, as in the novels they do touch on Clarissa's backstory in her musings, but we never get any detailed scenes of the Mal household as we do here. And of course, as I mentioned in previous videos, the books revealed Melba's true identity immediately, so there wasn't a big reveal of who she really was like there is here. But the books did hint that Julie was the favorite child and that Jules Pierre paid more attention to her and Clarissa was kind of forgotten, so that part of the reason why Clarissa was going after Holden was to prove her worth to her father. But I think the show upplayed that aspect of it more than the books did. As in the novels, another major factor was that her whole family legacy was ruined by what happened to her father, and that her mother and brothers, who were used to being rich and living a rich lifestyle, were now suddenly pariahs with nothing. But I did love this personal character study of Melba, and actually seeing her interact with her father and sister was great, so I'm going to give this a +4. So then we go back to the Rosinante, where Cohen shows Amos the chip he installed to sabotage the ship. Amos then calls Alex, who's in the pilot's chair, and shows him the chip and asks if this will help them regain control of the ship. Alex says that he doesn't know, that that's more of a Naomi thing. Amos then ends the call saying that he'll take it from here. He then grabs Monica Stewart and puts a knife to her throat and yells at Cohen, saying that if he doesn't tell him how to fix the ship, he'll slit her throat. But Cohen is just frozen with fear. Now, as we'll soon learn, Amos's threat was empty. He just wanted to make sure that Cohen wasn't holding anything back. But in the novels, nothing like this happened. Once Amos found the device attached to the lighting fixture, Naomi was able to clear the virus and regain control of the ship, so threatening Cohen in order to repair the ship wasn't necessary. However, before Cohen had confessed, all 4 members of the documentary team were being threatened. They gathered in a circle as the Rosinante crew stood menacingly around them. Amos had threatened to kill them, and although Holden would never let him do it, he let the threat hang there unchallenged because he wanted to scare them. And the 4 of them proclaimed their innocence much longer than they did in the show. This is interesting, though, because in a scenario where Naomi wasn't on board the Rosinante, it makes sense that Alex and Amos wouldn't be as good at repairing the sabotage. So it kind of makes sense Amos would use the only tool he has to try to solve the problem, brute strength. And also in the novels, Holden is too preoccupied by Miller's appearance to stop Amos from running wild. Or he isn't, I should say. Although in the books, Holden does muse that if Amos wanted to kill Cohen, there's no way he'd be able to stop him. As after Cohen confessed, they confined the documentary team to their quarters, but threw Cohen in the airlock, as that's the closest thing they had to a brig, and he of course was afraid of being blown into space the whole time he was there. I think they take Amos's character a little too far in this scene, as in threatening the life of an innocent to try to coerce someone else, whereas his behavior in the novels was more in keeping with how Amos is portrayed in both the books and the show, so I'm going to give this a -1. So then we see the Martian ship fire a probe, which gets caught by the slow zone. Alex then calls Holden, who's alone in his quarters, but doesn't like the interruption, but listens to what Alex has to say. Alex reports that the Martians ran the probe faster and faster until it was stopped in order to determine what speed being caught in. What speed that the speed limit is. So Alex is they're able to determine what the speed limit is, and the Martians then go that speed to try to catch up to the Rosinante in order to catch them. Holden says that he's not interested in being caught, so he orders Alex to match their course and speed in order to stay ahead of them. Alex then reports that they launched another probe to the edge of the bubble and it blinked out of existence, meaning they should probably avoid the edges. But Alex points out that if they turn, the Martians will catch them, and if they go straight, they'll eventually hit the edge of the bubble. So Holden says that they have until that long to come up with another plan. So to my recollection, the novels never mention what happened to the objects that reached the edge of the bubble, or maybe they did and I'm just not remembering it because they didn't make as big of a deal out of it. But either way, there wasn't this ticking clock scenario that there is in the show, where Holden is desperate to talk to Miller to find another plan, but I'll talk more about this later. Also, as I already mentioned, in the novels, the Martian had already determined with probes what the exact speed limit of the ring was months ago, I should say. So the Rosinante instantly started going that speed as soon as they entered the ring. But what they do here does work for the show, and the ticking clock element does add tension, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go to the Behemoth, where Ashford, while in the command center, receives a general message from the Martians that sent a skiff through the ring in order to tell everyone that they are in pursuit of the Rosinante and that they all should just remain on the other side of the gate while they apprehend them. Ashford then goes to find Naomi, who is working in the corridor on repairing the power grid. She assumes he's come to check up on her, so reports about the repairs to the power grid almost being complete. Ashford then tells her that he has news of the Rosinante, that in fact they did survive, as he relays what the Martians reported. Naomi asks questions about what condition the Rosinante is in, or if anyone has analyzed the message that Holden has sent out yet, but Ashford doesn't know the answers to any of those questions, but he tells her they'll find out soon enough, as they are going into the ring after them. He says that they didn't come all this way just to be told to stay in their place. Naomi then tries to convince Ashford that Holden is innocent and being framed, and Ashford quickly says that he believes her. But Naomi remarks the fact that he was going to destroy the Rosinante anyway, knowing their innocence makes it worse. But Ashford says that it doesn't make it worse because he needs to look out for him and his own. He then warns Naomi of becoming too nostalgic of her old crew, as nostalgia can play tricks on the mind, only making you remember the good times and not the bad. But very ironically here, he actually manages to convince her to return to the Rosinante more, as she sees herself as being too nostalgic of the OPA, and that returning to them was a mistake, and that her true place is with the Rosinante. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, the Martians didn't go in first, the Behemoth did, and we never got a scene like this in the books. Instead, we got a scene where Sam called Bull to engineering, where a man was refusing to do repair work with welding that needed to be done because he was too highly educated and he considered himself above that sort of thing. So Bull's solution was to shame him by offering to take over for him, which worked. We didn't have any discussion on the guilt or innocence of the Rosinante, and it is implied everyone just assumed they were guilty, and as I said, we never really got Sam's opinion on the subject, who was the one character that did know the Rosinante crew. However, the scene with the welder refusing to do his work was kind of boring and unnecessary. Getting a scene talking about the Rosinante and the matter at hand made a lot more sense for Naomi's character in the show, and it worked a lot better. So I'm going to give this a +2. So we then go to the Rocinante, where Alex buzzes on Holden's door, and when he opens it, Alex says that he didn't want to disturb him, but then asks if Miller has appeared yet. Holden just stares at him and then closes the door. As soon as he does so, Alex can hear Holden yelling at Miller through the door. So this is quite a funny little scene, but it didn't happen in the novels at all. As in the novels, Miller appeared to Holden as soon as they entered the ring to scold him for messing up. But after that, Miller actually didn't appear for a while, and Holden never tried to talk to him in order to get advice the way he does here. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense for Holden to seek Miller out for information, and this scene was effectively humorous, so I'm going to give this a +2. So as Alex is going back to the pilot seat, he can hear Monica Stewart screaming for help. He goes to the airlock to find that Amos has shoved them in an airlock, and they are screaming at Alex for help, saying that Amos is crazy. Amos then tells them to put on their space suits, revealing that Amos isn't trying to kill them, he just is kicking them off the ship. Amos then explains to Alex that since their comms are down, he figured that if Monica and Cohen go into space, they'll be picked up by the Martians, and so can explain to them what they saw in the Rocinante, and that he was just going to send Cohen, but because he was blind, he figured he would need Monica's help. As they prepare to leave the ship, Alex asks Monica to please tell the Martians that they didn't blow up the Sun Un, but she doesn't look at all eager to help them and then leaves. So in the novels, this never happened. After Amos found the device, Naomi did fix the sabotage and they did regain full control of the ship. Holden went off on his solo adventure to the station, and Naomi made a broadcast to all the ships following them, proclaiming their innocence, along with the evidence that proves it, and Monica's footage that shows what they were up to before and after they entered the ring. She said she would allow unarmed inspectors aboard as long as they complied with her guidelines. Many ships started sending messages back to her instantly, some asking for further clarification on the evidence, while others clearly didn't believe her. The Martians ordered them to immediately surrender to them, while the UN ordered they hand Holden over to them for interrogation. Naomi, of course, complied with neither of those demands. However, also included in the evidence was a picture that Cohen had sculpted of the woman had paid him to sabotage the Rocinante. Because in the novels, Cohen had met his benefactor but didn't know her name. He used his sculpting technology to sculpt an image of her, and as soon as Holden saw it, he assumed it was Julie Mao. So he thought that she was a protomolecule aberration just like Miller, so that the protomolecule had been the one to set him up and forced him to come here. This also explains why he wasn't seeking Miller's advice, because he thought he was the one who set him up. So part of Naomi's broadcast claiming their innocence stated that Julie Mao was the one responsible for setting them up, which made her claims a lot harder to believe. Bull, for his part, examined the evidence and was convinced by Cohen's confession that it wasn't forced and that it was in fact genuine, but where they lost him was the claim that Julie Mao was the one responsible, as he didn't buy that for an instant. So he was kind of on the fence on Holden's innocence. So he wanted to talk to the documentary team himself in order to get their first-hand account. So he contacted Naomi and proposed that she turn the documentary team over to the Behemoth as a show of good faith. She at first was resistant, but Bull explained that at the moment they were all had distracted, and that it would go a long way to prove their innocence if she let him have the documentary team. So Naomi agreed, and Monica and her team went directly to the Behemoth. They weren't thrown out into space or picked up by the Martians. The book's version seemed to make a lot more sense and develop things a lot better, so I'm going to give this a -3. Then we go over to the Thomas Prince, where Anna approaches Tilly on the CIC and tells her that it's not going to be the same seeing the ring from Titan. Tilly says it's going to be the same because the screen is a screen. Anna asks Tilly if she really means it, and she says no, she's just trying to make her feel better. Anna then asks Tilly when she's shipping out, which I think is a bit obtuse because Tilly has clearly been implying the whole time that she isn't shipping out, but I suppose Anna just wanted to force her to admit it point blank, which she does, so Anna asks how. Tilly explains that the first officer of the Thomas Prince is close to retirement and wants to work for her mother's company, so she offered him a nice position in exchange for letting her remain on board. Anna then asks if she can pull strings to allow her to remain on board as well. Tilly asks why Anna wants to stay on board, and she replies by asking the same question of Tilly. Tilly answers that she's a thrill-seeking, aging debutante with not much excitement to look forward to back home, and then tells Anna it's her turn. She replies that she's never seen a miracle play out before, and she feels like she's being called. Tilly calls that a bit too much and says the real reason is her selfish desire to be part of a historic moment in history unfolding, and she admits that that's true. So Tilly agrees to help her stay on board. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, the civilians aren't recalled to Titans, so Tilly never has to pull strings to stay. It should be noted, though, that here she says her mother's company, whereas in the novel, it's her husband's company. I suppose that change is mainly the result of them aging Tilly down considerably for the show. However, also in this scene, Tilly refers to herself as an aging debutante, which doesn't really apply to her show character, who is much younger than her book counterpart. But I suppose you could say she's aging as she's getting older, but in that sense, everyone's getting older, so it doesn't really mean anything. As to Anna's motivation, it's hard to say whether her book counterpart also had selfish desire to be part of something big, because it never really came up. It was more played off of her desire to unite all of humanity for a greater purpose. So I couldn't really say if her book counterpart would have pulled in favors to specifically stay on board the way her show counterpart does, as in the novels her action was for all the civilians to go into the ring, not just her. But this scene works well enough for what they established in the show, so I'm going to give this a 0. We then follow Melba, Stanny, and Soledad down the corridor as they are on their way to clear out Ren's locker. Stanny is talking about how James Holden destroyed the Sun Un and how it makes sense for that narcissist to do that. Melba is smiling, of course, as it shows her plan to discredit him has worked, and she adds that it makes you wonder what else he was lying about, which Stanny agrees with. However, her smile vanishes when Soledad adds that, well, they'll find out soon enough when the dusters catch up to him, as it warns of the dangers of her whole plan falling apart. They enter the locker room, and as soon as Melba opens Ren's locker, she's struck by a picture of Ren and his family, and saddened by what she did. But then Stanny comes by and snatches up 2 pouches of liquor from his locker, saying that Ren doesn't need them anymore. Soledad then grabs the status reports from his locker and reads what he had to say about them, and is surprised to hear that he thought Soledad caused too much social drama and that he put Stanny up for promotion. She then reads what he wrote about Melba, how he said that she was not a great worker but showed a lot of potential. She tells Soledad to stop, and we the audience know it's because she's feeling guilty. So in the novels, they never externalize Melba's realization that her whole plan could fall apart unless she gets to Holden before the Martians do. But in this medium, they kind of have to because they can't get inside someone's head the way viewpoint chapters in the novel can. Also, in the novels, they never showed them clearing out Ren's locker, and to my knowledge, he didn't have a family as he was younger, and Stani was actually the older one. Also, Soledad and Stani were a lot more sympathetic to Ren's passing than they are here. It portrays the team as having more of a sense of solidarity than they do in the show, which I prefer, so I'm going to give this a -1. We then get another flashback where we see Clarissa approach Julie after the party as she's sitting by a tree drinking. Clarissa yells at her for ruining her party, the one that she put so much effort into arranging just for her, and all the people we're going to be talking about is what a train wreck it was. And all Julie has to say to that is, let them. This angers Clarissa as she tells her off for being such a disappointment, but Julie just ignores her and continues to drink. So Clarissa snatches her bottle away and throws it away and continues to yell at her. So Julie starts to walk away and Clarissa asks her if she's going to her precious Belters and tells her how condescending she is to think that she can save the world. Julie then calls their father a damaged man and tells her nothing that she does is going to be good enough for him, and then she walks off. So again, the novels had nothing like this. It is only hinted at Clarissa's past with Julie, but this scene is so rich and so full of character development, I almost wish we could get a spinoff with Julie Mal, as it really sets the stage for what kind of person she was, when from season 1 we only really knew bits and pieces about her. And it of course also describes Clarissa and how desperate she is to please her father, and as Julie says she'll never be able to, which of course explains why she's doing what she's doing, as a desire to finally be noticed by him and to be the one that saves their family. So I'm going to give this a +5. So then we go over to the Rosinante, where Holden, Amos, and Alex are having a meeting to discuss where they're at. Holden explains that he was hoping Miller would show up and give them some more information on what to do, but it seems like that's not going to happen. Alex explains that whatever Cohen did to sabotage the Rosinante goes deep and can only be fixed by a shipyard. Holden then says their only hope is that if Monica and Cohen puts in a good word with them, with the Martians, but Alex interrupts, saying that he shouldn't count on that, as Amos was quite rough with them. They're probably not going to be too helpful to them. Amos insists that he was being gentle, but Holden tells him that he kind of wishes that he ran it by him first. Holden then outlines that if they keep running, they'll hit the bubble, and they can't communicate with anyone, so Alex asks what the best option is, and Holden answers the best option is to surrender to the Martians. If they surrender, then the Martians will board the Rosinante and see what state it's in and know that they couldn't have blown up the Sun Un, and it would clear them of the terrorist accusations. But Alex points out that might clear them of the destroying the Sun Un, but the Martians will still take the Rosinante because they believe it's theirs, and Holden agrees that they will. But it's either that or die. Alex is upset but sees his point, saying that he didn't think it would end like this. So in the novels, as I mentioned earlier, they didn't need a shipyard to fix the ship. All they needed to do is find the device. Of course, that was because Naomi was on board. I do wonder if it would have been that simple had she not been on board. So they weren't in this predicament in the novels because they could communicate, and as I already mentioned, they did, and they had proof of their innocence, but that didn't stop others from still wanting to arrest them. Although I do like this scene for the tension it builds and how dire everything looks, I do think the show had to sacrifice too many interesting elements to get there. Plus, I just love how Naomi could communicate. I find those scenes very interesting. So I'm going to give this a -2. So then we go over to the Behemoth, where we see Naomi looking at unlocking some of the skiffs, and Ashford sees her doing this. But then Drummer stands in the middle of the command center and opens the comms to address the whole ship. She starts out by saying that this is your captain speaking, but then goes into an inspirational speech, making it more about them, saying that this is their moment, and telling them that belters are strong and they're sharp, and this is the time to prove to the whole system belters' worth. And during the speech, Ashford starts banging on the decking, and Diago follows his lead, and soon after, the entire crew is banging along in a rhythmic support to Drummer's speech, showing their solidarity with their captain. Drummer ends her speech by screaming for Soledad, and Ashford begins a call and response where he echoes Drummer by chanting Soledad, and the crew respond with loud cheers. And it ends with Drummer yelling in a triumphant cheer. And while all this is going on, Naomi is silent and giving a very disapproving look, as she's clearly unimpressed. The Behemoth then enters the ring. So in the novels, it was quite different. Bull was in engineering with Sam when he hears Ashford make a ship-wide announcement that after speaking with the OPA leaders, they gave him permission to enter the ring to follow and apprehend James Holden. And then Ashford gives what is clearly he considered an inspirational speech of how this is the time for the belt to prove itself and how he has faith and confidence in everyone on board. After Bull and Sam hear this, they both agree that going into the ring is a bad idea. Bull says he's going to try to talk Ashford out of it, but Sam notes that that's going to be pretty impossible after he just gave his once more onto the breach speech. But Bull agrees, but says that he's going to try anyway, as they both suspected, it was unsuccessful. So it should be noted in the novels, Ashford's speech wasn't nearly as inspirational as Drummer's was in the show. There was no chest pounding and show of solidarity. It didn't have the cadence or yelling and cheering that Drummer's speech did. In short, it was dry and it stank of self-importance. In the novels, we see it through Bull and Sam's perspective, and both of them think of it as lame, and Ashford showing his egotism and trying and failing to be a good captain. It also portrays the Behemoth going into the ring as a foolish and foolhardy action. I gotta say, I much prefer the show's version. Even though the book's version is more in keeping with the dynamic the book established, the show's version is much more memorable. It makes for a great get up and cheer moment. It's funny that it sets a totally different tone, as the audience is more likely to agree with the decision and be excited by the decision of the Behemoth to go into the ring, and they see it as a great moment for the belt, whereas in the novels, the audience is more meant to see it as foolish. And I prefer to see it as a monumental moment because it is. Plus, you can tell the actors all had a great time with it. Cara G, who plays Drummer, recounted how excited she was to get to play a scene like this. And Dominic Tipper, who plays Naomi, talked about how difficult it was to act stern and unaffected when they were filming this. All she wanted to do was cheer and scream along with them, and she even said that she did so in between takes. So it was a nicely crafted moment that goes above and beyond the novels, so I'm going to give this a +5. So then we go to the Thomas Prince, where we see Father Cortez preparing to board the ship that will evacuate him to Titan when Anna approaches him and guides him away from the line. When Cortez objects that he'll lose his place, Anna tells him that his place is here and that she's found a way that he can stay on the ship. Then a bunch of security men move past him and approach a man who is in line to leave the ship. The security men tell the man that he's out of uniform, and they refer to him as Ensign. When the ensign refuses to go with the security men, they tell him that if he comes with them now, then it won't be desertion. But he complains that he signed up to fight skinnies and dusters, not whatever the hell the ring is, and he says that he's willing to face whatever consequences they want to give him, but he can't go into the ring. And he gets a bit unruly while he's saying this, so the security men taser him and carry him away. After witnessing this, Cortez tells Anna that he can't stay, that he has an 11-year-old son he needs to get back to. Anna asks, doesn't he want to be part of history like he was saying before, but he says no. He tells Anna, as he's getting back in line, that he was wrong, God is not with them out here. And then he departs and leaves the ship. So, okay, I usually don't do this, but for this scene, I'm going to give two separate scores as there's two things going on in the scene that I have very different feelings about. So first, let me start with the scene of the deserter trying to leave the ship. The novels didn't have a scene like this and didn't overall do as much as the show did to express the general anxiety the passengers and crew were feeling at entering the ring. We did get some of this in Anna's services where she conversed with her new flock, and they talked about how uneasy they were feeling about going into the ring, but it was nothing to this level. I think showing someone trying to desert was a very powerful way of conveying how fearful people were of going into the ring. And given the history of the protomolecule and what does actually happen next, they were very justified to feel this way, so I'm going to give this a +3. Now, getting into the other part of the scene, and that is Hector Cortez leaving the ship, I can't begin to describe the level of disappointment I felt when I first watched this scene. It was staggering. As someone who has read the novels and thus knew how integral Hector Cortez was in the events to come, to see him leave before he actually got to do anything of importance was a massive disappointment. I will discuss in the upcoming videos Cortez's importance to the story and how his absence did, in my opinion, very negatively affect the show, so I won't get into any specifics here. Only to say, to write this character off the show now made his entire appearance on the show kind of a waste of time. It seems to me it was only done so they could give a shout out to the novels, as on the show he appears briefly in 2 scenes and then promptly fucks off. Now, you could argue that he was also there to show the anxiety people are feeling at going into the ring, as at first he's talking about how important it is to go to the ring, and then how disappointed he is that he can't go, but then we find out those words are hollow, and ultimately he's too afraid to go. But, knowing how important he is to the story in the novels and how well they used him there, this use of him seems like a complete and utter waste, because the part I just mentioned about the scene with the deserter was enough to illustrate the anxiety the crew and passengers were feeling at the prospect of entering the ring. It didn't need to be added to. And this character could have been used far more better had he stayed on board and had a storyline similar to his one from the novels. But I do suspect part of the reason he was written off was because his part was mostly in the second half of the novel, a section that the show streamlined because they wanted to cram it all into 2 episodes, so they probably getting rid of Cortez's character allowed them more easily to just streamline that whole storyline. But I'll cover that when I get to the 2-part finale. But suffice to say here, this was an utter failure on the writer's part, so I'm going to give this a -5. So then we see Pastor Anna in an elevator as she records a message for her wife telling her that she's going into the ring. She does so apologetically and mentions that she won't even get the message until after she's already gone through, and Anna won't hear her response until after she gets back. She then says to herself that she will be coming back, portraying some of the anxiety Anna herself is feeling at going through the ring. She then spots Melba at a nearby station and introduces herself and asks if she's disturbing her. Melba says no. Anna asks if she's staying on board to go into the ring, and when Melba says that she is, Anna expresses the anxiety that she's feeling at going through, and Melba says that she feels the same way. Anna then asks her why she's going, and then we get a flashback, which I'll get to shortly, that explains that she's doing it for her father. But what Melba tells Anna is she's doing it for the hazard pay. So in this scene, Melba actually seems comforted by Anna, which was not at all the case in the novels, as the only interaction Melba had with Anna was the one where Melba nearly killed her. But it was an interesting decision to have two of them be on good terms, and this forces Melba to examine her motivations. But getting to the part of Anna contacting Nono, in the books there was a scene at the start before Anna left Europa where Nono told Anna that she always apologizes for things that she's already done rather than asking permission. She notes that that is a trait that irritates her, but it's what makes her good at her job and maybe exactly what is needed on the mission to the ring. So when Anna contacts Nono to tell her she's going through the ring, the only part we see play out is Anna telling Nono that she needs to apologize again, and then the chapter ends. So the implication is that she's about to do something that Nono doesn't like, and instead of asking permission, she's going to apologize for already doing it. There's something about the simplicity of that I love, as it's a nice callback to an earlier part of the novel that really captures who Anna is as a character that I don't think the show does quite as well, so I'm going to give this a -2. So then we get the flashback where Clarissa is brooding over the failed party and her rough encounter with her sister when her father walks into the room and asks about Julie. Clarissa replies by saying the bitch finally left, and Jules Pierre tells her not to talk about her sister that way. Clarissa then notes that he called her a lot worse tonight, and Jules Pierre remarks that it is true. Julie knows how to get under his skin. He then remarks on how he admires Julie's spirit and how she refuses to be stopped by anyone, even him. Clarissa is appalled by this and notes how she just spat in his face tonight and how can he admire her for it. But Jules Pierre responds by saying that she has the spirit to continue the family legacy, whereas Clarissa, all she does is plan parties. So this scene makes it clear that Clarissa is doing what she's doing to gain her father's admiration and to prove her worth in a way that the novels never did. I mean, the novels did touch on how Julie was the favorite daughter and Clarissa always felt like she was living in her shadow, but we never got a specific scene that really hammered that point down the way this scene does. As much as I think Clarissa Mal is underdeveloped in the show, I think this scene does a much better job of exploring her true motivations than the novels ever did, so I'm going to give this a +5. So we then go back to the Behemoth where we see Naomi trying to access a skiff in order to leave the Behemoth and return to the Rosinante, but every time she tries to open the airlock, she finds her access has been denied. Drummer then appears behind her and tells her that she thought Ashford was being paranoid when he asked her to lock down the skiffs to prevent desertion, and she never expected it to be Naomi. She then asks Naomi why she's returning to her inners when they're her people. Naomi replies by saying that she loves them for it, but never should have left the Rosinante, as she was just feeling nostalgic and she belongs there. Drummer asks why Naomi didn't come to her about it, and she answers that she was afraid that Drummer wouldn't let her leave. Drummer then opens the airlock and says, "You underestimate me." Naomi then gets in the airlock to leave and has a way to say goodbye. Drummer tells her not to go too fast out there. So in the novels, Naomi was never on the Behemoth, so we never got a scene like this, as none of the four main characters in the Behemoth had any reason to leave it. However, this makes sense for the story they established with Naomi all season, which started with her giving the protomolecule to Fred Johnson, which also never happened in the novels, which set her on her arc to go to the Behemoth, and is ultimately concluded here, where she realizes she never should have left the Rosinante. So it works for the dynamic established in the show, but it isn't necessarily better than what occurred in the novels, as it leaves only two main characters left in the Behemoth instead of the four that the novels had, so I'm going to give this a 0. We then go to the Rosinante, where we see Holden alone in his quarters, contemplating his impending encounter with the Martians, when Miller suddenly appears and asks Holden why he's slowing down, that they need to get to the crime scene. Holden yells at Miller, asking him where the hell he's been, but Miller only says, "Come on, we gotta get to the crime scene." Holden tells him enough of the cop talk, he wants to know exactly what's going on with him, so Miller then spouts off a bunch of technobabble that goes way over Holden's head. So Holden then says, "So the crime scene?" So Miller pops right back into action, saying that they need to get to the station or the nucleus, whatever you call it, in the middle in order to investigate what happened. Holden asks if he's talking about the structure in the middle of the ring space that's dragging everything towards it, and Miller snaps his finger and confirms that's what he means. He then says that he has a case to solve and Holden wants the truth. Holden still looks confused, so Miller just moves his head in a come with me motion and says, "Are you coming or not?" We then see Holden on the hull of the Rosinante in a spacesuit as he plots a course to the station in the middle. He then launches off of the Rosinante, accelerating towards the station in the middle. So in the novels, going to the station was actually Holden's idea. He figured that it may contain the answers he's looking for. Plus, at this stage, he is still under the impression that a protomolecule version of Julie Mao was the one who set him up. So he believes the protomolecule is calling him there. So he believes that he better answer the call. He does tell Naomi about it before he leaves, and she's just upset about how he always goes off on his own, leaving her behind to worry about him, as he did with Eros, with Ganymede, going on the doomed Agatha King, and now this. She talks about how much she hates it. He says that if he tells her not to go, then he won't go, but she can't do that, so he does go. To be honest, I'm kind of glad the show ditched the whole running motif of Holden always storming off on his own to leave Naomi behind to worry about him like a good housewife. Something about that just seems a bit outdated. But as for Miller being the one to tell him to go to the station, I think that makes more sense too, since it is what Miller in the books wanted as well, so it makes sense he would be the one to give Holden that idea. So I'm going to give this a +3. So my final adaptation score for Intransigence is a +16. Not a bad score, as it was kind of back and forth with this episode, with things they did wrong, mostly to do with failing to live up to some of the potential of the novels, particularly Anna and Hector Cortez. But this episode ultimately added more that enriched the story, such as the Clarissa Mao flashbacks, which were amazing. So overall, a good episode. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 3 Episode 9. I'll be back in just a few days for my book to show comparison for Episode 10. So be sure to keep an eye out for that, as well as many more videos on The Expanse and videos on other shows like Star Trek, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.